Hello, Borodar. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for the official online launch of the new MA in Global Heritage at Cardiff University. This is a collaboration between a number of academic schools in the College of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences at Cardiff. My name's Professor David Clark, and I'm the Programme Director, but also Head of the School of Modern Languages. And we have here with us today colleagues from the School of Archaeology and Religion and the School of Journalism, Media and Culture, who are going to be speaking to you. We're also collaborating with the School of Social Sciences. And along the way, there will also be contributions to this MA from the School of Welsh and School of English, Communication and Philosophy. So you can see already that one of the really important features of this degree is its interdisciplinarity, the way that we're bringing together disciplines from across the college, people working in all kinds of different areas, but with a shared interest in heritage, to give students on this programme a really rounded understanding of the meaning and function of heritage in today's society. So what we thought we would do with this launch event is that rather than go through the minutiae of all the different modules you can take on the program, we're going to be focusing on the research that goes on here at Cardiff and the researchers who do it, the researchers who focus on heritage, and to give you a flavour of the kinds of people that the students will be able to work with and the kinds of exciting projects that they will be able to hear about. So we're already into the introduction from me. I'm going to say a little bit about the programme and its aims before we hear from our other speakers. And then we're going to have presentations from Dr. Dave Wyatt and Professor Jane Henderson, the School of History, Archaeology and Religion. Then Professor Hannah Diamond, School of Modern Languages, is going to be speaking to you about her work in France with a number of museums there. And finally, we have a recorded presentation from Dr. Tom Alberson from School of Journalism, Media and Culture. Tom can't be here today, but his specialism and his contribution to the MA is a really interesting one. Tom is a specialist in visual heritage, particularly around photography as heritage, and that adds a really fascinating dimension to what we're doing. So I've already said that the key features of this MA are that interdisciplinarity and your chance to work with scholars who are doing lots of interesting projects, not just academic projects that lead to publications, but as we will see, projects that really directly interact with the heritage sector. And you're going to be able to, as a student on this programme, you'd be able to profit from those relationships. But we're also going to be looking at heritage, as the title of the degree implies, in the global context. We're obviously really interested in our context here in Cardiff and in the Cardiff region and in Wales. The Kaya Heritage Centre, which Dave and Jane are going to be talking about, is a really fantastic example of that. The university is also a strategic partner with Amgueddfa Cymru, National Museum of Wales, and I believe that we may in fact have Jennifer Gironi, the head of research from Amgueddfa Cymru, in the audience today. So shout out to her, as I believe the terminology is. We're going to be working very closely with the museum in developing this programme. But the global issues that we're going to be addressing, this is just a few keywords to pick out some of the things that are going to be important for us. I was just talking to Jane earlier about decolonising the museum and disputed objects in British museums. That's obviously been a big theme globally, talking about repatriation of objects, recontextualization of objects in museums and other forms of decolonizing other forms of heritage as well. And there's been a global activism around that decolonization process, which we will be studying as well. Those are obviously questions of social justice. They're questions of power. They're also questions of identity, identities claimed and defended. There are questions about how we understand our history, aren't they? How we place ourselves in human history and make sense of that. My own particular interest in heritage is around heritage and conflict, how we use heritage to communicate about past conflicts, how heritage can be used in processes of diplomacy and peace building. So that's going to be another important key word for us. Something which is occupying all of our thoughts, I know, at the moment is the question of sustainability around heritage and particularly climate. Heritage is a key driver of the tourism industry, which is again very important to Wales. But that tourism industry has impacts, that has environmental impacts, and from the other direction, of course, climate sustainability potentially have an impact on our ability to preserve our heritage for the future, to pass it on to future generations when landscapes, buildings, collections, and so on may be threatened by climate change. Okay, so that probably just gives you a flavour of some of these global issues around heritage, and that's really just kind of skimming the surface there. But it gives you a sense of the issues that we are interested in this programme really do have that global dimension. So to sum up what students are going to be able to get out of this programme, we've talked about the unique global approach and some of the issues that we're going to be engaging with through heritage. We've also talked about the value of interdisciplinary study and how students will be able to work right across the College of Humanities and Social Sciences here at Cardiff. And the way in which you'll be able to take advantage of the connections that colleagues have working very closely with the heritage sector. And that will also feed into the placement option for the dissertation, which would allow you to work with a heritage organisation and to conduct research there as part of the process of writing your final master's dissertation. Okay, that's enough from me. That gives you hopefully a flavour of what we're doing. So I'm going to hand over now, if I can stop sharing my screen, I will hand over to Dave and then to Jane, who are going to be talking about their work.
Good morning, Borodar. Can everyone see the slides okay? Grand. Whoops, we've gone back. Let's bring it back. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Well, of course, at the core, universities have three essential missions. They research, obviously, they create new knowledge, they educate, and they teach others to create new knowledge, and that's you know, a key part of postgraduate study is that kind of apprenticeship to create new knowledge. And they have as well a very important social mission or civic mission, which essentially means to make the world a better place through that education and through that creation of new knowledge. And in a project that I'm involved in, you know, that social civic mission is very, very important at Cardiff. And a project that I'm involved in that is all about that social mission, but also about bringing together those three missions about research, education, and the social mission together and dovetailing them can have very powerful impacts. And it's also a project that relates very directly to heritage, and so it's extremely relevant for this master's. And it's called the Caer Heritage Project. Now, Caer is an interesting word. It's an ancient Welsh word meaning defended place, really, or sometimes interpreted as fort. And you'll find it embedded in lots of place names in Wales. Indeed, Cardiff, Caerdydd in Welsh, has this as a prefix. And for our project, Caer is very, very important because it refers not only to a piece of heritage, which you're looking at. Actually, this is a very large hill on the west of Cardiff, embedded within suburbs there. And the magnifying glass shows you that there's something hidden beneath the trees of that hill. And it's, in fact, huge ditch and banks and ramparts of an Iron Age hill fort from 2,000 years ago. And indeed, the richness of this site has many facets as well, goes much further back in time as well. So that word Caer would apply to this place, but it also applies to the communities, and Caer is indeed an acronym for Caerau and Ely. Caerau and Ely are two suburbs that you can see surrounding that hill fort, and they're home to 25,000 people. in the west of Cardiff. They're communities which, it has to be said, face some significant challenges, social and economic challenges around deindustrialization. We have incidences of long-term unemployment, poverty in work, food poverty, and other challenges faced. They're also communities of great warmth, talent, resilience, solidarity, and they have the most amazing heritage, of which this is the jewel in the crown, Caerau Hill Fort. And so our project is very much about how can we use that heritage and really explore that heritage in order to address some of those contemporary challenges and use heritage as a driver for community development effectively, and potentially community regeneration as well. And our project's been going for many years now. It started in 2012, and it focuses very directly on what we call co-production of knowledge, and that means working with communities on an equal and reciprocal basis, and being very much embedded in communities to create new knowledge about the past, but also to showcase that new knowledge and tell different stories perhaps for that community that are often perhaps stigmatized or stereotyped in certain ways within the media, and tell much more positive stories. So this hill fort is actually one of the biggest, we've discovered it to be one of the biggest and oldest monuments in Cardiff. And yet, interestingly, unlike many other sites in Cardiff, and I think David mentioned Amgueddfa Cymru there, just up the road, we have St Fagans, which is an open air museum, living museum really of reconstructed heritage sites. And we have Cardiff Castle in the centre of Cardiff. All of those have amazing infrastructure around them, and they have interpretation, but this place had none of that. And yet, actually, we've discovered that it was the original Cardiff. It was the original place where people were living. It was the biggest and oldest monument, as I say, in Cardiff. And it's just 3 miles from our university, so it's quite close to where you'll be studying. So underpinning our project, Caerau Heritage, which, as I say, began nearly 12 years ago now, were objectives that were really thrashed out with the local community, with local school teachers, with young people, with the farmer who owned the land, and a whole range of residents. And those underpinning objectives have carried us a long way. And they really are about that civic mission and bringing it together with research and education. So the key was that we wanted to raise interest in discovering and valuing that local heritage. And to really kind of get people to understand how the richness of the heritage that was under their feet, perhaps. But we also, through that process, wanted very much to create new life opportunities, new educational opportunities, new networks, and not just for the community members or the young people in the community, but for everyone involved, for our students who come and take part in a project, for other academics. And we work with academics from across the university in that interdisciplinary way that David was talking about. Everyone gets something out of the project, and everyone brings something to the project. We've adopted a community development strategy of co-production and co-creation, which we have learned from a community partner who is embedded within our project, Action Caerau and Ely, who are a local community development organisation that are there to address those local challenges and tell positive stories about their communities, but is made up very much of local people. And the other thing we wanted to do, and I've alluded to this earlier, is to challenge some of those unfounded and negative perceptions and stereotypes about these communities, and create positive stories for the area through the discovery of heritage, both in the media and within the kind of minds of perhaps the wider kind of Cardiff area, perhaps where some of those stereotypes are held. And to do that, we really brought together such a range of partners. I mentioned Action Caerau and Ely. We work with all of the heritage organisations locally as well. We have Museum of Cardiff, where we can take the story into the centre of Cardiff. Alongside the National Museum, Amgueddfa Cymru, we work with the Glamorgan Archives to explore the modern history of the area as well. And we also work very much with local schools, especially Cardiff West Community High, which is the immediate high school, where we have a scholarship programme for students in that school, because not many come on to higher education, and that is actually a travesty. Many should. So we have a scholarship programme funded by the university to support that. So Caerau Heritage is really about involving everybody in kind of discovering these new paths, but to do so in a way that is very much about that civic mission and making the world a better place. And what we discovered actually through a whole series of big community excavations and projects, as I've said, that have not just explored the prehistory of this site, which dates to the Iron Age, as I initially alluded, but we found an internationally significant story with local people being involved in excavations that actually underneath the hill fort is a Neolithic or Stone Age site, which is an early gathering place, very rich in artifacts that dates back 6,000 years. So this hill goes back, this is where people were gathering 6,000 years ago. We've discovered a Bronze Age house nearby, and I say a little bit about that before I finish, in a park not far from the hill, which is incredibly preserved. There's a rich Roman archaeology both on the hill and in a Roman villa nearby. There's an interesting medieval story here, and there's an interesting modern story as well around the housing estates themselves and how they were utopian visions of the future, the garden village principle social housing estates. So it really, you can tell the story not just of Wales, but perhaps of the UK through these communities. And so we've really involved people in all of those discoveries. And that took us so far. We discovered amazing new knowledge about the past, but still there was nothing at the hill fort. There was nothing to value the communities, nothing to tell people about that amazing heritage, no place for people to go. So about 5 or 6 years ago, we worked for a major grant from the National Lottery Heritage Fund in the UK to develop a wonderful Kaya Heritage Centre at the base of the hill fort to transform, as you can see here, a disused playground that was kind of had been vandalized and an old gospel hall into a beautiful playground, park and community heritage centre. And this took a lot of work, but it involved a lot of people as well. It involved all local people were involved in the design of this building, in the design of what they wanted to see in the interpretation of the archaeology and history we found there. And it really has made this transformational change. So the Kaya Heritage Centre opened in 2021, just after the pandemic, actually, and the whole lockdown. As I say, it really is about value. We wanted a building that was a kind of statement building, like you would see in a museum, not just to kind of put a mural on an old gospel hall. We wanted a building that valued these communities. And so since it has opened, it has become a real amazing centre for not just the exploration of heritage, but also for a range of community development activities too in the community. And the building isn't owned by the university, it's owned by Action in Caer Ely, but the university has a very firm stake in it. It has great political support. So we have our First Minister here of Wales, who opened the building and has recently returned to an exhibition that we held at the centre. And everything you can imagine goes on there. We do lots of work where we work with local schools and young people that break down barriers to higher education, but also get them to learn about heritage. We have exhibitions, we have a lot of creativity and art. So art and artists have always been embedded in our project from the start. We work with the School of Biosciences, we work with the School of Social Sciences, we work with the School of Welsh, we work with the School of Journalism, who all bring bits of their co-created strategies perhaps along to be embedded within these communities. So this is a hub, a centre for the university in these communities, but is very much about contributing what the university has to those communities without being kind of top down. And it's very much about sustainability. We are there for the long term, and the university has recently supported 2 full-time posts to be working at the centre to help facilitate and help our students, many of whom go out and get involved in the project, to do really interesting things at this amazing heritage centre, not least within my own course and the course that will be available on the MA. Students work in groups to actually design resources and projects, working with local people that will be of benefit to the Heritage Centre in the community as part of their assignment. So that's kind of embedded in the curriculum. Similarly, in archaeological digs, students get involved and are discovering those new stories about Caer Ely with local people. But also there's lots of extracurricular potential as well for people to come out and volunteer. We have amazing volunteer groups. We have a heritage gardening group at the centre. We have a Love Our Hillfort group. So lots and lots of potential, and lots of potential as well for research on these amazing heritage, and indeed on these incredible communities, both from a heritage perspective and perhaps from a broader perspective around things like social sciences. And indeed, we've of course published a lot about not just the heritage of the site, but also about how you can use heritage to do this kind of co-creative community development work. So just to finish off my bit, I just thought I'd flag up, alongside the building, then we created a whole 5 ages of Cairo interpretation, which was co-created with local people based on our excavations and various co-research projects. And the most recent of these was an amazing exhibition of artwork and artifacts from an excavation just up the road in Trelai Park, which is about half a mile from the Hillfort, where I mentioned earlier we discovered the first house in Cardiff, a Bronze Age house with the floor layer intact, the remains of which obviously was discovered underneath a park which had never been built on in the city because it had been a racecourse previously to being a park. And those are very rare finds to find a Bronze Age site like that, and very rich in artifacts. And within that, we also found an incredible Bronze Age pot. And you can see one of our conservation students, Leonie there, that pot came out of the ground in fragments in 2023, decorated, very rare find. And our student was involved in reconstructing that pot so it could be taken back into the community and put on display in the community, at the heart of the community, for local people to see alongside pieces of artwork inspired by the story of their discoveries during the excavations. So I think that, and of course the politicians came along, First Minister came along to launch that exhibition as well, and it's still currently visible. If anyone's around and would like to visit on Mondays or Wednesdays, the exhibition's open at the Cairo Centre in Cairo on Church Road. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of an overview, a little bit of a sense of what we do at the Cairo Centre and how indeed it can be really embedded within this wonderful new MA programme. And I hope that I'll maybe see some of you visiting the centre soon. And I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Professor Jane Henderson, who's going to talk about conservation and indeed may want to pick up on this point about Leonie and that incredible pot.
Hi, everybody, and thank you very much. Bore-da, Pnawn-da, morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. What I'll be contributing to this degree is a module which will be optional on collection care in the museum environment. And my next slide will indicate why it's optional, because it's definitely not for everyone. But within the heritage sector, there's a whole range of skills and talents that go into delivering heritage outputs. And sometimes it's called behind the scenes. I don't think behind the scenes is the best expression for it, but there's all these talents in museums. One of the exciting things is how many, for example, women in science there are within heritage. And that's sort of the angle that I come at. Now, based in Wales, we are launching a global heritage. And I think that understanding your place in global heritage starts from understanding your local place and the place and dealing with what's around you. But the discussions that we have relevance for the world. So these are some of my Cave Collection students who have been visiting museums around Cardiff, South Wales. That one is in Swansea. And there we can engage with questions to do with colonialism and the return of objects, which is something that Swansea Museum engaged with. Now, these are discussions that are often tied up with the concept of care, the idea that somehow care gives ownership and increases the stake and the rights. And that's something that we would discuss in a module on collections care, because the whole concept of care could be seen to be a Western idea or an industrial idea or colonial idea. The idea that retaining something, preventing decay is the best thing that you can do. But for some people, use, engagement, decay, burial, reburial, new life. These are more appropriate ways to understand the world. Dave's going to do my slides so we can move it on. So within collections care, we do our best to we lost the slide. There we are. And we do our best to connect to these big issues. But behind doing that, we do clamber around. We do go into the air conditioning plant. This is the air conditioning plant. I don't know if people from Angwerth for Cymru can air conditioning in that Garrow, with one of many wonderful colleagues from the museum, Rob Pierce, we are learning how an air conditioning plant works. Now, that might seem tremendously tedious to many, and I do understand that. But if you get these things right, you do two things. Well, you do three things, but you look after things well by making sure they're not getting too hot or too dry. But you also, by getting the levels right, you don't use up too much energy. You can attempt to be a sustainable organization. So that's important. And if you get these things right, then the experience of visitors can be comfortable, and you can do your best to make sure that those collections are there to be enjoyed, not only for this generation of visitors, but for the future generations of visitors. That we don't know exactly what they will look like or how they will want to engage. If we leave them the potential, they might want to tell very, very different stories. Who knows in 100 years what story they might want to tell about Kaya? It might be a completely different story. It might be the moment of transformation when the area changed, you know. Perhaps the rest of Cardiff will be flooded and that'll be the only bit left. We don't know what stories that people will be telling, but where we have these objects like that Bronze Age pot, which have been around for hundreds or thousands of years, those stories can be told and retold. And that is the wonder of human potential. So there we are, climbing around the top of a library shelf, looking for insects. And that is very much some of the things we do, because managing those collections care projects means that we can make sure those collections are available. Now, it's wonderful being in Cardiff. There's so much heritage. We are so close to London, obviously, to go and engage with those collections, but there's so much that we can do even locally. This is some of my students taking light readings down at Cardiff Story. It was called Cardiff Story, the Cardiff Museum. Now, this is an award-winning museum that every single item in that collection has been collected with full consent, with an interview with every donor, and it's an absolute model for how collecting can be done. And that's important, because if we do the management of our collections well, then we are being responsible global partners. We can say that we can tell stories of the world without inappropriate power relationships, that we can talk about tea from around the world, but the collection, the tea service that is provided has been provided by someone who wants that to be there, who agreed fully and with full understanding to that collection being there. So we work in partnership with a lot of museums. We do a lot of site visits. We invite guest lectures in, and that's a big part of the Care of Collections module that might be there. If we can move on. So one of the things that we'll all be doing is supervising dissertations. And students with me, for example, might be doing dissertations on collections management issues. One of the big things that I have done in the past with students is on communicating data. So this is us collecting dead insects, everybody's favorite, spiders down microscopes. But those stories, they tell us how things are going to last. They help us protect this very, very rare books. So, but also what we do with the students is practice communicating that. How do you tell someone who perhaps isn't that interested in dead insects about the concentration and the density of them, about what that means for whether we should be eating in offices, how we're managing spaces? These things all underpin our work. And eating in museums is like a really important issue, I think. We've avoided it because of the problems of insects, and yet eating is one of the ways that you welcome people. So that's a classic kind of dilemma that we need to sort of think through. So I've done work with students to publish on things like pest management, and if I could move forward, and particularly around the communication. But a lot of what I've published with students on has been around sustainability and about how we manage collections into the future, on how we manage Welsh collections as a whole, as a nation. And there's so much potential here in Wales because we have a good relationship with government, I would say, in the sense that we can speak to government agendas speak to what museums and heritage do. So there's plenty to engage with there, and that becomes very interesting. And students get a chance with us to speak with curators, to listen to what the curators say is important to them, so that they can then develop their advice. In this situation, we were going to give advice about lighting and about emergency preparedness to curators from the Firing Line Museum. But it's important for the students to hear what the curators want, what their priorities are, what their interests are, what messages they're trying to communicate, what their trustees prioritize, because all of these things provide important context for the slightly more technical supporting content that you might get in my degree. So just to say, I do like welcoming students. I love teaching. I'm a member of the Welsh Museum Federation. I sit on ICOM UK, that's International Council of Museums. I'm Secretary General of the International Institute of Conservation, and I'm on the Science Museum Group journal editorial. And I'm very embedded. I've been in museums all my life. I love museums. If you come anywhere near me, I will change the way you look at museums forever. I'm not sure if that's a good thing, but it's a guarantee. So I will hand over to the next person. Anna.
Oh, hello, everyone. David's asked me to talk to you today a little bit about the work I've done in France, working with the heritage sector there. I'm actually a professor of French history. My expertise is around France during the Second World War, and I've written quite widely on this subject, notably about the experience of the French civilians during the German occupation. So this has brought me to do some work with museums that deal with that period in particular. And you can see here the wonderful, well, not so new Musée de la Libération de Paris. I realize now that actually the museum opened in 2019 and we're about to celebrate another 5 years on from there. I'm not sure where that 5 years has gone, but you can see the museum here on my slide in the corner. And I'm just going to talk to you briefly about some of the work that I did at this time to get that museum moved from its former site that you can see in this picture. Now, this former site of the museum was a real headache to find. It was on top of one of the mainline stations in Paris, the Gare Montparnasse, and you actually had to get there. It was in the middle of these huge skyscrapers, a kind of park that you can see, and you had to go up the stairs on one of the platforms in the station to get there. And for people who had mobility issues, it was impossible really to manage. There were some lifts, but not very nice. So the mayor of Paris decided in 2015 that the museum should be moved to a new site. And this is a picture at the bottom of the new site. You can see the building on the left here. And I was brought in as part of a team by the director of the museum to help think through what this new museum would look like and how the permanent exhibition would be put together. Just a quick word about the site here. You can see these two buildings that are actually twins, reflections of one another. Neoclassical buildings on Place d'Enfer Rochereau, which is one of the large squares in southern Paris. And there were buildings like this all around Paris, customs buildings, but most of them were destroyed during the revolution. So there really was a heritage issue about preserving the building as well as placing the museum's exhibition in the building. Now, opposite the building here is the entrance to the catacombs, which are those huge areas of burial sites that are actually the second most popular tourist sites in Paris after the Eiffel Tower. And the idea, I think, was that the interest in the catacombs would also draw people to the new museum opposite. So in the process of thinking through how the new permanent exhibition should look, we had to work quite closely with architects whose main concern was to preserve the building as the building was rehabilitated and renovated. We had to think about the space and how the subject matter we were working with could be integrated into the new building. So as time went by, we visited, we saw, we thought about those spaces, and we worked closely with exhibition designers. And for me, a historian, that was a really exciting new experience. And you can see here one of the mock-ups that were done by the Agence Clapiche Clarisse, who wanted to put at the heart of the museum this moment of the liberation of Paris. And you can see this notion that it's an open, light space with all the French flags around it. And the idea was that people would emerge from the darker enclosed exhibition rooms, some of which were in the basement of the building, to reflect the kind of underground nature of the French resistance that was organized, and emerged into this bright, gay, festive room. I just throw in this picture of this liberation dress because it's one of my favorite objects in the museum, and I couldn't resist it. This wonderful dress that was made, donated to the museum by a woman who was awaiting the liberation, and she wore it proudly on the streets in Paris once the Germans had been routed. Also, staying with the Liberation Room, one of the areas where I was able to make quite a key contribution is here. You can see on the screens, there's film running of this very important parade made by General de Gaulle and members of the resistance as they installed themselves back in Paris after the occupation. A very festive moment when crowds fled to the Arc de Triomphe that you can see in the background, a real moment of joy and positivity, but which was also accompanied by scapegoating, particularly of women and those who'd collaborated with the German regime. And what we've tried to do here is to show the two sides of the liberation. At the front, these images of de Gaulle and festivity. And then if you go round to the back, you can see this other, less pleasant side of retribution, of how those who had made the wrong choices, if you like, were punished. Now, another reason for this relocation to this new site was the remarkable underground rooms underneath the museum. And now you can see me here at the time we first visited those underground rooms, which were being used by people, young people, for parties, believe it or not, who would break into these rooms and have great discos. But these rooms were incredibly important for the resistance because they were the site of where the resistance general, Colonel Rol-Tanguy, planned the liberation of Paris. So it was really important to us to work very closely with heritage professionals to renovate these areas that, and you can see right down these 100 steps that go down into these underground rooms, which were actually a former air raid shelter. And you can see on the wall, we had to recover the original direction underneath the graffiti, PC, Poste de Commandement Rol. Now, we discussed at length how we should present these rooms for visitors. And then in the end, it was agreed to leave it clean and to work. We worked with software companies who developed a digital tour. So in wearing these glasses, you can see in the slide, you can visit this area and see it as those resistors who were living down there, waiting for their moment to liberate Paris, would have seen it. The various different rooms, the telecoms rooms, the arms rooms, and the various offices that were occupied at the time. And the site of these rooms underneath the museum was another very strong rationale for relocating the museum there. Another of the contributions that I was able to make as part of my involvement in this new museum was the Exodus rooms. One of the areas that I have written about extensively is the moment of the German invasion in 1940, when the populations, the civilian populations, fled from Paris, France on her knees, the moment of defeat. Now, this room the fourth room in the permanent exhibition, it borders onto the pavements that you could see in the original slides. So we weren't allowed by the heritage experts to put anything on the walls virtually. So what we did was to place the images and the quotes of the experience of these people on the floor, literally France floored it, if you like, and left the room as it needed to be for to satisfy the needs of those at the Ministry of Culture who were concerned to preserve the heritage of that room. Now, we had so much material actually left over that we'd uncovered and worked with. It was agreed that the first temporary exhibition of the museum would be about this experience of flight from Paris as the German armies were invading. And I was brought in with the museum director to co-curate this first temporary exhibition at the museum. Unfortunately, it was in the middle of COVID, so the actual exhibition itself didn't get as much mileage as we might have hoped, but it was still a thrill, and many colleagues who may be here today, including David, may remember our opening ceremony of the exhibition. And one of the biggest thrills for me was to see this exhibition poster in the metros of Paris. Just a quick glance at some of the exhibition itself, a few images. You can see that we've tried to immerse our visitors in this experience of occupation and the moment of the German arrival, this very iconic picture of Hitler in Paris. And some of our favorite objects that we used were images, photographs, and these amazing children's paintings of those people who were flooding out of the city at the time of 1940, really trying to convey the enormity of this event through a children's eye view. Now, as I said, COVID interfered with us. We weren't able to keep the exhibition open as much as we'd hoped, but we were fortunate enough to get funding to make a short film of the exhibition, which I'm sure David would be able to pass on to anyone who's interested. Moving on quickly, David, have I a little bit more time? 1 minute. More recently, I've been brought in to do some work at the Charles de Gaulle Memorial in Colombey-les-Églises. You can see his wonderful house at the bottom. He's buried there, this great resistance leader who was able to rally France and later became president. They built in Colombey, because it was the place he chose to live there and was buried there, this huge memorial building and this enormous cross of Lorraine, which is quite extraordinary, that is visible for miles around. And I was brought in as a part of a team to evaluate the future of the Memorial and to consider what could be done. There are some huge exhibition halls. The biggest problem is where it is. And you can see here on the map, it's out literally in the middle of nowhere, difficult to get to from Paris. And de Gaulle deliberately chose it because it was so isolated. He wanted to escape there, but it has meant that from the point of view of the Memorial as a heritage organization, it has struggled to survive. So we met with local politicians, and there is now a process underway. We made some recommendations that they are considering the Memorial's future, and it's likely that I will be brought back in as part of a team to enact some of those decisions once they have been made. And finally, my current project that I'm working on is about Josephine Baker. I'm writing a book about Josephine Baker's War, this extraordinary African-American entertainer who came to Paris between the wars and became the most extraordinary international music hall star, who did in fact join forces with de Gaulle and those who were fighting the Germans. She helped the Allies acting, transmitting intelligence, using her huge reputation as a cover for that work. And here's some pictures of her when she donned the French Army Air Force uniform, entertaining troops, doing everything she could to promote the cause of the Allies. And this work, very recently, hot off the presses, is taking me to the Petit Palais next month to talk in the context of their Modern Paris exhibition. They're doing a study day on Josephine Baker, and I've also links are being made with the Mémorial de Caen, who are currently running an exhibition on the dawn of the American century and very interested in the work I'm doing. So there we see perhaps some opportunities opening up for the future. Sorry about that. Back to you, David. Thank you very much for your attention. I will just pass this back over to you.
I think if you stop sharing, Hannah, that's
sorry, it's not showing me the stop share.
at the top of the screen, maybe. Is there a stop share option there? That's fantastic, brilliant. Okay, yes, it has. Thank you. So I'm now going to attempt to play the video by our final speaker, Tom, who couldn't be with us today, and that's going to involve some technical magic. Let's hope that that works.
Hi there. I'm sorry I can't join you live for the launch of this new MA programme, but when David asked me to record a brief segment for you, I was very happy to do so. My name is Dr. Tom Olmston, and I'm a senior lecturer in media history in the School of Journalism, Media and Culture, and I'll be contributing to the new MA programme through a module called Visual Histories. So my research interest is in the history of photography, really. So I'm interested in how different photographic practices have developed, but also how photography has influenced ways of thinking about key issues of shared interest in the world. So some of my early research was on photography in Western Europe and questions of post-war reconstruction after 1945. What role photography played in influencing ideas about the city in the post-war moment. At the moment, I've been working on a couple of books, one on war photography, looking at how the practice of war photography has developed from the turn of the 20th century to the late 1990s, through some of the major conflicts of that period, of course, the First World War, the Second World War, Vietnam, and other wars of decolonization in the latter part of the 20th century. But to provide a bit of balance as well, I've also been working on a book about photography and peace, the relationship between peace building, conflict transformation, and photographic practices, be that sort of photojournalism or participatory photography projects. So yeah, that's an overview of my research interests, but it isn't just focused on academic publications. I've also been working with the archive at Cardiff University, which has some really interesting material around the history of photography. And I've been working to try and get that into the public eye, for want of a better phrase. I've been slogging away at an exhibition about the photographer Bert Hardy and the imagery he made between the late 1930s and the early 1960s. That will inform an exhibition at the Photographers Gallery, Bert Hardy Photojournalism in War and Peace. You can see some of the themes of my interests developing here. And I've also been working with communities in Cardiff that Bert Hardy photographed in the 1950s to try and uncover some of the histories and legacies of photography for that community in Cardiff. So you can see there an interest in museums and galleries as well as research publications. And I've started recently as a trustee of Photo Gallery here in Cardiff. So I'll be expanding my understanding of museums and galleries, as well as archives and universities in the coming years, which builds on work I did before coming to academia. I worked for 10 years in the heritage sector in one of the major heritage funders in the UK, then named the Heritage Lockwood Fund. Worked in Scotland for them for a decade, a while ago now. I'll be contributing, as I mentioned, to an MA on visual histories. And so we're going to try and do a number of things through that MA module. One will be to think about how visual culture has developed in the past, historically. So what are the influences and what are the legacies of different branches, different streams of visual culture? How are some of those remediated in the present, for instance? You know, so I'm interested in the history of photography in the 20th century, but what impact does that have on visual culture in the 21st century? How people share content, share images. What are the afterlives of famous photographs in social media, for instance? But also, what are the afterlives of elements of visual culture in galleries and museums? How do institutions use visual material to tell histories of nations, of communities, of peoples, of conflict, or whatever you like? So yeah, we'll be exploring the history of visual culture, but also the way in which visual culture can tell us about history, the way in which visual material is used by institutions and by cultural actors to interpret the past. So this will involve a number of case studies. Hopefully it will involve some site visits. We'll definitely be talking to practitioners, curators, and archivists and the like. And there will also be opportunities for you to start to present your own interpretations of historical events or historical themes using visual material, exploring visual culture. Okay, brilliant. It's been really nice to chat to you. Apologies again, I couldn't join you live. I hope that gives you an interesting insight into the module MA Visual Histories, and maybe a bit of a flavour of some of the things that you can look forward to on the MA programme overall. All right, thanks very much. Bye.
Diolch pawb. Thank you everyone. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Hannah and Tom. I hope that has given everybody a sense of the richness of the research that is going on in Cardiff, but also just a sense of the different approaches that people are taking to heritage, and the intersections between the work that people are doing in terms of their research and teaching, and the engagement, the civic mission, which researchers here at Cardiff are very much part of, and that students who sign up for the MA and join us in September of this year for the first time will be able to experience too. So thank you everyone who's come along to listen. This video is going to be available via our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to revisit it and share it. If you're in the heritage sector and we are not yet in contact with you and you'd like to work with us, then please do feel free to get in touch. We're already starting to build a portfolio of placements for our students. And we're very much looking forward to working with existing and new partners to make that happen. We will have some time for Q&A when the recording has finished, if people want to stick around for 5 minutes. But otherwise, I would just say, diolch again, thank you very much, and hope to see you all again soon.